Friends, I would like to open our worship this first day by sharing a reading with all of you. Our reading for this morning is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. And I'm reading this morning from the New Revised Standard Version. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them to his vineyard to work. When he went out at about 9 o'clock, he saw that there were others standing idle in the marketplace, and he went to them and said, "You also go to the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again at about noon and again at 3 o'clock, and he did the same with all those he found. And at about 5 o'clock, he went out again and found others. And he said to them, "Why are you standing here idle?" And they said to him, "Because no one has hired us." And he said to them, "You also go to the vineyard and work." And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first." When those who were hired at about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual full daily wage. And then when the first came, they thought that they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they began grumbling about the landowner, saying, "These last, they only worked 1 hour, and you gave them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." And he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not get what we agreed on, the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give these last the same as I gave to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Are you envious because I am generous?" And so the last will be first, and the first will be last. This is not the first time, and I am sure it will not be the last time, that I have felt called to bring a message about the kingdom of heaven. Sometimes passages in the New Testament that reference the kingdom of heaven, they are understood to be about heaven, that reward that comes in the afterlife after we pass from this world into the next. But this is a very limited and limiting understanding of these passages about the kingdom of heaven. What is being suggested in the passage that I shared with all of you this morning is not some promise for something we will get after we die, but is instead telling us about what our world can and will be in the here and now. As we Quakers understand it, this is the world that is growing all around us in this very moment. We Quakers are a very theologically optimistic people. We have a fully realized eschatology, which means that we are not waiting around for the second coming of Christ, but instead we proclaim that Christ has come to teach his people himself, or that the living presence is alive right now in our current world. And because of this belief in the living presence, we claim that the kingdom of heaven is growing in this world right now, all around us. You might say, that seems a tad unlikely. And you might gesture at all of the dumpster fire of 2020. You may say this does not feel like any kind of promised paradise, like in any way like the kingdom of heaven. And this is true. Our world does not look much like the kingdom of heaven in the New Testament. And yet still, we Quakers affirm that it is still growing all around us. Even in moments of violence and despair, even in times of destruction and horror and pain and suffering, that goodness is still growing up like a dandelion pushing up through the cracks in the sidewalk, growing all around us in this moment. I like to think of this as a song that is lovely and sure, a song that is thrumming on even when there is chaos and despair and destruction all around us. Something that is unceasing and tenacious, that is quietly creating change and coaxing us always onward toward that which is best and truest and most just and most loving. I often think about the kingdom of heaven, this thing that is growing so tenacious and sure in our midst. And I often wonder what it is like, this beautiful thing that I hope for and long for and look for all the time in our world. And we get glimpses of this kingdom of heaven throughout the New Testament. But this particular story, it gives us one of the clearest answers. And it is such a beautiful thing. This is what the kingdom of heaven will be like. It will be like an employer who, seeing that there are those who need work, will give them work, and everyone will make a fair wage, even if some are able to work longer than others. Think about what this means. This is a story that is showing us a picture of a world that is driven by compassion and generosity. A world where everyone who wishes to work can work, but where there is also compassion for those who cannot work. A world where everyone is provided for, a world that is about equity and not just equality. The difference between equality and equity in this context is that equality suggests sameness, but equity suggests fairness or justice. Here is an example, kind of a simple or silly one. If my husband and I, Christopher and I, were to be given the same food every day, that would be equality. The same food, same number of calories, same nutritional value for both Christopher and I. That would be equal. But of course, Christopher and I, we don't have the same nutritional needs. Christopher is almost a foot taller than me. Our bodies have a different composition. Our nutritional needs are different. Equity would be giving myself and Christopher what we need to thrive even though that would not be the same. It would be giving us what we need, even if that was not the same. Equality might be sameness. Equity would be giving us what we need to thrive. Here's another more subtle example. In 2015, Gwen Ifill was interviewing U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg. Justice Ginsburg said this: "People ask me sometimes, when do you think it will be enough? When will there be enough women on the court? And my answer is when there are 9. Of course, in 2015, in response to this statement, approximately half of the male population in the United States, or maybe throughout the world, was horrified. Horrified. That is not fair. 9 female justices on the Supreme Court? That is not fair, they said. But of course, a woman was not appointed to the Supreme Court until 1981, which means for 192 years, there were 9 men on the Supreme Court. So, if we have 9 women on the Supreme Court for almost 200 years, then we could start thinking about having 4 men and 5 women, 5 men and 4 women, 4 women and 4 men, and 1 non-binary person. We could think about maybe moving to equality or sameness, right? But what Justice Ginsburg is referring to is equity or fairness. And that may not be sameness. It may not mean that it is equal. So in the story of the landowner and the vineyard, we see this. Everyone earns the same wage, even though some are not able to labor as much as others. It is not equal, but perhaps it is fair. It is, of course, not a coincidence that I am bringing this message just after we all celebrated Labor Day. Because when I read this passage about the vineyard and the landowner, the first thing that I think of is a basic universal income. People being paid a basic income no matter how much they are able to labor. This universal basic income would be given to everyone, even those who are unwilling to labor rather than unable to labor. But in the Bible story for today, it is not clear to us why some of the laborers were able to begin labor at dawn and why others did not begin laboring until later in the day. Perhaps it is because they could not, they were unable. But perhaps it is because some of them were unwilling to labor for a full day. No matter what the reasons behind whether or not they were laboring, everyone is given the same wage. The employer is practicing compassion and generosity in this story of the vineyard. And after reading it, I'm left wondering what our world would look like if we were led forward primarily by compassion and generosity. What would happen to our country if everyone was given a basic income so they could eat, so they could rent a place to live? What would happen if everyone had enough money for basic needs? That would transform, I think, who we are. And I think it would transform who we could be. That generosity and compassion, it would create ripples of more and more generosity and compassion in our world. Perhaps it would bring us closer to being that kingdom of heaven that we see suggested in this passage today. This is what the kingdom of heaven is like. It is a world where people have value, no matter how much or how little they labor. The kingdom of heaven is like this. It's like a world where people are offered chances to prosper because they are human, not simply because they can create capital for someone else. The kingdom of heaven is like this. It's like a place where equity thrives, where human life is valued because human life is intrinsically valuable. I think the challenge for us today is to go out into our world with eyes open, seeking that kingdom of heaven that is growing quietly but tenaciously all around us. Our challenge is not to be so caught up in the violence and destruction of our racist and capitalist society that we are unable to look deeper for the love and justice that is growing all around us. And of course, our challenge is not simply to have eyes that see and to witness and to wonder, but also to be. The challenge of this passage is not just to see, but to be. Because the truth is that the spirit of goodness is alive with us in this moment. That spirit of love and justice, it is calling us forward into action. It is calling us to be the hands and feet that grow that goodness all around us. So if this week, if you are looking around and you see barely a glimmer of the kingdom of heaven in the world around you, then now is your chance. Now is your chance to do things that create change, to be the one who is calling forth equity and justice and not simply equality, to be the one who breaks through, even if it is just a tiny crack and a tiny glimmer, to be the one who's building that kingdom of heaven. May this first day, may we hear again the good news of the kingdom of heaven, which is a world of justice and compassion and generosity. May we hear the good news, and may that good news open our eyes to see that kingdom growing all around us. And may that good news call us forward to be the kingdom of heaven that is like a world of justice and generosity and compassion. This story, it can begin like this. The kingdom of heaven is like all of you.